Hi friends, welcome to the writing. So my name is Ratan. Guys, in this video, we will talk about the Spring Boot microservices. Come to Spring Boot microservices, the first class. We will see what are the advantages of the Spring Boot. So everyone in the real time we are using the Spring Boot, right? The Spring Boot real time is all about the Spring Boot concepts, guys. That's what today in this video you will get the clarity about what exactly importance of the Spring Boot. It's very important introduction to the Spring Boot and what are the functionalities are given by Spring Boot. What are the advantages of the Spring Boot? Got the point, right? Yeah. Guys, to understand the advantages of Spring Boot, we should understand the limitations of the Spring framework. So the limitations of the Spring framework will become the proper introduction to what Spring Boot, right? Proper introduction to the Spring Boot. That's what, guys. In the Spring, what are the limitations we will see? Then we will convert that into the Spring Boot advantages, right? Good. Guys, see the first one here in the Spring, what we will do in the Spring, we need to hunt for the all the compatible jar files. Guys, in the Spring, we need to hunt for the all the compatible jars, right? All the compatible Spring version jars, and we need to add. Tell me, guys. We need to add all the jars in what? All the jars in build path, right? Maybe you know the build path or class path, right? Yes or no? Yeah. In the Spring, we need to hunt for all the compatible Spring version jars. Maybe in the Spring, for the MVC, we need to download some specific jars, and maybe you copy it from the Maven repository, right? And you copy it from the Maven repository. From the Maven repository, you are placing the format XML file, right? So in the Spring, we need to hunt for all the compatible Spring version jars, and we need to add all the jars into build path or what class path, right? Exactly. Because we need to add one jar, multiple jars. Generally, we need to add the multiple jars, right? That is a problem with what? Limitation of the Spring, guys. Don't say problem, which is limitation of what Spring, right? Exactly. Okay, the limitation of the Spring will become what Spring Boot advantage, right? So advantages of what Spring Boot. Guys, to overcome this problem, the Spring Boot is come up with the new feature, Spring Boot starters. The Spring Boot starters. This mandatory entry question, guys. What is a Spring Boot starter? What are advantage of the Spring Boot starters, right? Exactly. Because what the Spring Boot starter will do, Spring Boot starters will aggregate. Remember the point, guys? Starters will aggregate all the required dependency into the single dependency. Because starter will aggregate or combined. Starter dependencies will aggregate the multiple dependencies into the single dependency, guys. That's what the point I'm saying here. Starter dependency. Starter dependency. Tell me, starter dependency will aggregate the multiple dependencies into a single dependency. So it is good enough to add how many dependencies? One dependency, right? The starter dependency will aggregate the multiple dependencies into. Tell me, guys, multiple dependencies into how many dependencies? Tell me, single dependency. So it is good enough to add how many dependencies? One dependency, right? Exactly. Sir, can you please tell me one example, sir? Good. Guys, we have the Spring Boot starter web is there. Because when we add the Spring Boot starter web one dependency, which supports the MVC concepts, which supports the Tomcat concept, like automatically Tomcat will come, and it supports the REST calls also. I think this dependency is enough to get the MVC support and the Tomcat support and REST support, right? It means what this starter dependency is aggregating the MVC, Tomcat, REST dependencies into single dependency or not? Guys, mandatory entry question. What is the starter dependency? Starter dependency will aggregate multiple dependencies into single dependency. So in build path is good enough to add how many jars, guys? In build path or class path. Tell me, guys, in build path or what? Class path. It is good to add how many jars? Tell me. Only one jar. Guys, good enough to add what? Only one jar, right? Exactly. I'll tell you one more thing. Guys, we have the Spring Boot starter tester. Actually, in the Spring classes, if you want unit test cases, guys, maybe you should have the clarity about unit test cases. So in the Spring, for the JUnit, we need to add one jar file. For the Mockito, we need to add one jar file. For the Hamcrest, we have to add one more jar file. For the Spring Test, we need to add one more jar file. But Spring Boot starter test is there. A Spring Boot starter test. Another jar is like, Spring Boot starter dependency is there. Got the point, right? Spring Boot starter test dependency is there. Once if you add the Spring Boot starter test dependency, it will give the support of what? It will support the JUnit. Guys, it will give the support of JUnit, and it will give the support of Hamcrest, and it will give the support of what? So Mockito, and it will give support of Spring Test also. It means in the how many dependencies we added in the pom.xml file? Guys, in pom.xml file, we are adding only one dependency. What is the dependency term here? Spring Boot starter test dependency. It will support what? JUnit, Hamcrest, Mockito, and Spring Test. I think you got the clarity, right? Tell me, guys, what is starter dependency? The starter dependency will aggregate the multiple dependencies into single dependency. So in build path, it is good enough to add only one dependency. One jar, or we can say like what? One dependency, right? Good enough to add only one dependency. Best example is the Spring Boot starter web. When we add the web, it supports like MVC, Tomcat, REST. Second one is what? Spring Boot starter test. Spring Boot starter test means what? It supports the JUnit, Hamcrest, Mockito, Spring Test, right? Yes, that is the very important point. So what is the advantages of Spring Boot starter dependency? Spring Boot starter, this is mandatory interview question, guys. Spring Boot starter tell me, guys, starter dependency. Guys, I think you got the clarity, right? First question. Any doubts? Limitations of Spring. In the Spring, we need to hunt for all the compatible Spring version jars and compatible libraries. We need to add all the libraries into the class path, right? And you're taking the data from the Maven repository. But Spring Boot starter dependencies we have. The starter dependency will aggregate multiple dependencies into single dependency. So it is good enough to add only one dependency. Spring Boot starter web. If you add this dependency, it automatically supports the MVC, Tomcat, and REST calls. And if you add the Spring Boot starter test dependency, it supports the JUnit, Hamcrest, Mockito, Spring Test. It supports this all, guys. Guys, first one is clear, right? Exactly. Okay, second limitation of the Spring. Guys, see, in the Spring, everything we done manually, but Spring Boot automated. Guys, we are in the Spring, like now we are driving like manual car. So manual steering, gear system, everything is manual. But Spring Boot is what? These days we have everything is automated car, right? There is no gears, there is no, everything is like, automated, right? Exactly. The second point is like, in the Spring, we need to download the databases. Tell me, guys, we need to download the database, and we need to download the database, and we need to download the server. Guys, we need to tell me, we need to download the database. Maybe Spring classes, some basics of Spring. We need to download and install the, tell me, guys, we need to download and install the databases and the servers. Because maybe in the Spring, we install the databases and what servers, right? Maybe install the Oracle database. Maybe install the Tomcat server, right? Oracle databases, Tomcat server, like we done like that. Yes or no? Yeah. So we need to install and we need to download and install the database and server. External database and what? We need to download and install the external databases and tell me, external database and server, right? Exactly. And we need to deploy the application. We need to deploy the application into external servers, right? We are deploying or not? External servers, right? Exactly. Okay, this is all about manual process. We need to download the database, we need to configure the database, we need to install the servers, and we need to deploy the application into what? External servers, right? Because once the application is done, maybe you are making the Tomcat what folder? Web apps folder, right? That is external server we are deploying or not? Exactly. That's what, guys, instead of this downloading and installing the database and servers and deploying the application to servers, we have the Spring Boot is come up with a new feature that is called Spring Boot Embedded Database and Embedded Servers. It means Spring Boot by default given embedded database and by default given embedded servers also. Yes, you got the point, right? Embedded databases and, tell me, guys, embedded database and what? Servers, right? Exactly. Okay, so in Spring Boot, we don't need to install the servers. Spring Boot is common with the embedded database and embedded servers. Sir, what is embedded means? Embedded means what? Internally it comes it coming automatically, right? Sir, what is the embedded server, sir? Spring Boot given the three servers, guys. One is the Spring Boot by default given the Tomcat server, Jetty server, JT server, and it is given like Undertow server. The Spring Boot is by default given like embedded servers are these three: Tomcat, Jetty, and what? Undertow. So by default they given like Tomcat, guys. Actually, when we add the Spring Boot starter web dependency, by default this is called default server. Jetty server means we need to add the dependency. Undertow server means we need to add the dependency. But Spring Boot starter web, when we add, by default we getting Tomcat server. Okay, server we no need to install, guys. That is manual process in the Spring. But Spring Boot embedded servers, server is server is they given embedded. Guys, I think you got the clarity, right? Embedded servers. Next one is what, guys? Embedded databases. So in your system, no need to install those databases also, external databases. So Spring Boot says that you don't install the Tomcat servers and databases. You focus on your development. I will give the embedded servers and embedded databases. Tell me, guys, what is saying? You don't need to focus on how to download and install the servers and databases. You focus on your work. You focus on your development process. I will give you the embedded servers and embedded database, right? Sir, what are the embedded databases they given? HT database they given, HSQL database they given, Apache Derby they given, Derby they given. Yeah, these are the three embedded databases are given by Spring Boot, right? Exactly. Your second point is clear. What second point, tell me? So in the Spring, we need to download and install the external database and servers, and we need to deploy the application to the external servers. Actually, we need to deploy. It means we need to place the application into the Tomcat web apps folder, right? That's the external deployment, guys. But what the Spring Boot says? Spring Boot embedded servers and what? Tell me, guys. Spring Boot embedded database and servers. Spring Boot embedded database and servers means Spring Boot is by default given embedded servers and databases. We no need to install and configure the servers and databases, right? Just you can focus on your business logic. Okay, sorry, clear now? That is a mandatory second question, guys. What are the embedded database and servers given by Spring Boot? What are the, tell me, this is the first class you should learn in the Spring Boot microservices, guys. Most of the faculties maybe they teach like theory. They don't know what they are teaching even. You please write the complete notes for this, and you please share these videos to your friends so that they'll get the clarity. So Ratan sir is teaching very well. What are the embedded servers and databases, and what are the embedded servers and databases given by Spring Boot? Right? Exactly. Is it clear? Like you clearly understood what the limitation of the Spring advantage. The limitation of the Spring will becomes what advantage of the Spring Boot, right? The problems in the manual car becomes the advantages of the automated cars, right? Yes or no? There is 2 points we done. All of you can please repeat the 2 points once. What is the first point? In the Spring, we are hunting for the compatible jars, and we need to add all the jars into all the dependencies into format XML file, right? We need to go for the compatible versions jars, right? But Spring Boot says what? Spring Boot starter web. Spring Boot starters. What does Spring Boot starter will do? Please respond here. Think like this is a class. Yeah, definitely. So you please respond, involve in the class. Okay. Spring Boot starters means what? Tell me, guys. Starters will aggregate all the required dependencies into what? Single dependency. Okay, the starter dependency will aggregate. All the dependencies into what? Single dependency. So it is good enough to add how many dependencies, guys? Only one dependency. Best example is what? Spring Boot starter web, which supports like MVC concepts, REST calls, and it supports the Tomcat server. If you go for the Spring Boot starter test, it supports like tell me what it supports. It supports the JUnit test cases, Mockit test cases, Hamcrest test cases, and Spring test cases, right? First point. Second point is what? We need to download and install the servers, and we need to deploy the application to servers, right? In the Spring. But Spring Boot is come up with the embedded servers and what? Embedded databases. It means we don't need to download and install the servers. They given by default embedded servers and what? Embedded databases, right? Embedded servers they given like Tomcat, Jetty and Anatom. Embedded database they given like H2 database, HSQL database and what? Apache Derby database, right? Exactly. Is that clear now? Yeah. Come to point number 3. Because come to point number 3. In the Spring, we need to configure the, because maybe we have some basics of Spring. In the Spring, we are configuring, guys. So we need to configure. In MVC, guys, we need to configure the dispatcher servlet. Maybe who have the clarity about the Spring MVC. Dispatcher servlet we need to configure. Some people will tell you the code without dispatcher servlet also, because complete application flow control with dispatcher servlet, but you don't know what is a dispatcher servlet. That is not your mistake, faculty mistake. What we will do. So here this is like dispatcher servlet. In Spring we need to configure the dispatcher servlet, and we need to configure the view resolvers, and we need to configure the data sources. Okay, so now we need to configure what? Data sources. We need to configure the JDBC templates. This all we need to configure in XML or Java based configuration. Okay, Spring we need to configure the dispatcher servlet, view resolvers, data source, JDBC template. This all we need to configure. Manually should configure this all, guys. Some beans we need to configure. That's what in the Spring Boot we have the auto configurations. Spring Boot is come up with a new feature, Spring Boot auto configurations, right? Spring Boot auto configurations. Okay, in the Spring Boot, these all are auto configured. Dispatcher servlet, view resolver, data source, JDBC template, these all are what? Auto configured. You got the point, right? Auto configured, guys. We don't need to configure manually. In XML configuration or Java based configuration, we don't need to configure, guys. These all are auto configured, right? Exactly. Guys, this is auto configure, right? The beans are auto configured. Beans are what? Auto configured. Just best example: dispatch servlet, view resolver, data source, JDBC template. Okay, handler adapters, like these all like auto configure, right? Etc. Auto configurations, guys, automatically configured. In the Spring, we need to configure in dispatcher servlet, view resolver, data source, JDBC template like this. But in Spring Boot, auto configuration means what? These all are auto configured, right? Is it clear? Yes. The last point, guys, question number 3. What the question number 3 tell me? What are the, see guys, the people, some interviews, they'll ask the question, Spring Boot supports auto configuration. Tell me what are the classes are auto configured. At least tell me so 3-4 classes. What the classes are auto configured. Because you got the point, right? So what are the Spring Boot auto configuration? What is Spring Boot? Tell me, guys. What is what? What is Spring Boot auto configuration? So in the Spring, we need to configure some classes manually, like configuration file. Dispatcher servlet we need to configure, view resolver we should configure, data source we have to configure, database template we have to configure. Okay, so these are all the classes you should configure. But what about and property file also? Property files you need to configure. But in the Spring Boot, these all are like auto configure, right? What is Spring Boot auto configuration? So Spring Boot auto configuration, right? Yeah, that is the third point, guys. Are you clear, right? Yeah, good. Guys, the last point you can go for this one, fourth point. Guys, in the Spring, we have one bean and multiple beans. The Spring, we have the multiple beans, right? Multiple beans. Yes, the Spring, we have the multiple beans. So it is difficult to monitor the complete application flow, right? Guys, it is difficult to monitor the, See, we don't have the monitoring tools in the Spring, guys. It's difficult to monitor the complete application, right? Difficult to monitor the complete application. Yes or no? In the Spring, we have the multiple beans, guys. It is difficult to monitor what? Tell me, it's difficult to monitor the complete application or not? So like, what are the databases? What are the loggers? What is the transaction? So these all are running properly or not? So it's difficult to difficult to monitor the application, guys. That's what, guys, the Spring Boot, they'll come up with one new feature, Spring Boot activators. Maybe so most of the people don't know the Spring Boot activators. What the Spring Boot activator says that So it is good to monitor the application at the production environment, right? Guys, we need to monitor the application in production environment or not? We need to monitor the application in production phase, right? Production means in the project live. We need to monitor the application in the production environment, guys. When we monitor the application in the production environment, guys, when we need to monitor the application production environment. So what the loggers are there, okay, about the loggers, about the databases, about the application health, okay, about the application health, about the shutdown statuses, about the shutdown statuses, about the endpoints, this all, right? We need to monitor this all. How many beans are auto wiring, how many beans are loaded. So no, we should monitor this all, right? We need to monitor the application in production environment, guys, about the loggers, about the databases, about the health, okay, about the health and about the shutdown information, about the endpoints, about the auto wire. This is all the information, right? Yeah. So to monitor this all application, we have the concept like now they're giving the one microservices like Spring Boot activators, guys. They give the microservice like production ready microservices, guys. That is a Spring Boot activator. Spring Boot activators will monitor the complete application health, complete application information, guys. We got the clarity now. So the last point is what? The fourth question. What is the Spring Boot activators? What is the advantage of what? Advantage of what the advantage of Spring Boot? Tell me, guys. Spring Boot what? Activators. What does Spring Boot activators tell me? The Spring Boot activators will monitor the complete application information, right? About the loggers, about the database, about the health, about the shutdown, about the endpoint, about the auto wire. Guys, this is the first class about the Spring Boot microservices. This is the first class about what? Spring Boot microservices. I think you got the clear explanation about the Spring Boot and microservices, right? Yes. Most of the guys will teach hours and hours theory. Finally, you're getting any point means no use. After the class, I'm asking what is the Spring Boot starters, you're unable to explain. But class is very clear, right? Spring Boot and what? Microservices. Guys, are you clear, right? Spring Boot microservices. Yeah, so I think you got the clarity about this all the point, right? Spring Boot starter, Spring Boot database, embedded servers and databases, Spring Boot auto configurations, Spring Boot activators. What are the advantages? See, after this video, if someone is asking what is Spring Boot starter, we need to answer immediately. Spring Boot starter dependency will aggregate the, tell me guys, what is the point here? Spring Boot starter dependency will aggregate all the required dependencies into single dependency. Will aggregate all the dependencies into single dependency. So it is good enough to add how many dependencies? One dependency. Guys, it is good enough to add how many dependencies? Only one dependency, right? Yeah, best example is what? Spring Boot starter web. Spring Boot starter web will pull the, it will give the support of MVC, support the REST, support the Tomcat also. But how many dependencies you added? One dependency, but supporting multiple things, right? Best example, second one is what? Spring Boot test. So test means it supports the JUnit, Hamcrest, Mockito, Spring REST, Spring test, this all, right? It means what? We are adding how many dependencies? One dependency. One dependency is aggregating the multiple, right? Yeah. Spring Boot starter aggregate the multiple dependencies into a single dependency. So it is good enough to add only this dependency. The second point is what? What are the embedded servers and databases given by Spring Boot? Spring Boot is by default given the Tomcat server, JT, Undertow, and H2 database like H2, HSQL, Apache database. So these databases we no need to, tell me guys, we no need to configure. These are these are the embedded database and embedded servers, right? We no need to install the servers and databases. Third point is what? Spring Boot auto configurations. In the Spring, we need to manually configure view resolver, dispatcher servlet, data source, JDBC template, property files, these all. Property file also, right? Yeah. But in the Spring Boot, we no need to configure these all. These all are auto configured. Dispatcher servlet, view resolver, data source, JDBC template. These all are what? Auto configure, right? Exactly. Third one is what, guys? Spring Boot. Fourth one, Spring Boot activators. Spring Boot activators will monitor the complete application of production environment. This is good to monitor the application, right? It's good to monitor the application about the loggers, about the health and shutdown endpoints and auto wiring information. Is all right. Yeah. Guys, all of you, please write the notes carefully. I'll upload the Spring MVC all the videos. Just like the video and comment the video. Subscribe to our channel to get the more videos. Clear, right? Guys, please share the information to your friends and everyone write some comments here. Some people they are writing their own comments. Yeah, all of you, you please take care about the class and write the notes. All of you please like and comment and subscribe to our channel to get the more videos. Thank you guys. Bye.